I'll try to leave time for questions, comments, stuff like that. I'll speak up too. Okay, how many of y'all are native? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of y'all are southeastern tribes? Okay. How many of y'all are Choctaw and Chickasaw? Okay. How many of y'all know the difference between the Choctaw and the Chickasaw? Okay, one group got lost, the other one didn't. So we're oh, it's awful. I love it. So, my name is Ryan Spring. I am the Director and GIS GPS Specialist for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma Historic Preservation Department. Long title. I wear many hats, as you do if you work for the tribe. But anyway, I'm here today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Choctaw people and society. So this presentation is really geared towards 1700s Choctaw lifeways, how Choctaw people lived during these times. Now, kind of what I'm going to be doing today is I have 3 presentations all in a row, and these are all going to be kind of working off each other. So if you miss one, that's fine, or if this is your only one, that's fine. I'll recap kind of each one before I go on. But I guess the whole purpose of these presentations is I'm trying to experiment a little bit, and I want to look, really the theme of all these is values. So the theme of these presentations is going to be what values Choctaw people used to hold, and are those values still the same today with our people and with our leadership? Now, I think they are, but I kind of want to present some of that to you guys too and see what you think as well. So just because I have knowledge on this doesn't mean I'm the expert. So each and every one of you have your own story, and you've been raised and you've been taught by your own family. So there's always information out there that not everyone has. But anyway, so let's go through this. You guys ready? Excited? Okay. So this picture here is a picture that was done in, there's a painting, sorry, that was done in 1949. And it's a picture of Choctaws living in Louisiana at this time. Now this painting is a little bit later than the time period I'm going to be talking about, but this painting is perfect because it represents all aspects of Choctaw life, which we're going to be talking about. So in the front center, you can see the women. They're cooking on traditional pottery. They're splitting river cane. They're weaving baskets. They're taking care of the children. You can see them in traditional dress for that time period, their day-to-day wear. You can see their pack baskets. You can see them gossiping. And when you move to the right, you see all the men in the corner, basically waiting until dinner. Talking trash, making jokes. You know, it's the same thing you see when you go out today and you spend time with your family. On the bottom right's a little Choctaw dog, or a Chickasaw dog if it got lost. We don't really know. If you move over to the left side of the screen, you can see a summer house. That's the kind of house that Choctaws would have lived in during the summer. It's wide open. So it's hot in Louisiana, it's hot in Mississippi. There's no AC. And yeah, you get used to the weather, but it's still hot. So by having no walls and by actually treating the ground around you, you don't have to worry about animals. You don't have to worry about bugs. And then you have the nice cool breeze. And then during the winter, you're going to move into your winter house. In this case, this is a much later one where Choctaws this particular family has moved away from the traditional winter choka, but they moved over to building log cabins. A little bit more permanent. So overall, this is a great painting. This whole time I'm trying to remember the name of it. But yeah, I don't remember the name of it. It's in my notes. But if you just type in anything in Google and type in Choctaw, you'll see this. I think it's, no, I can't remember anything now. Trying to remember the name of it, trying to remember the author. Come on, go. So, a quick overview. These are the topics we're going to kind of go over today. We're going to look at the responsibilities of men and women. We're going to look at what people did during the different seasons, the hot seasons and the cold seasons. We're going to look at the societal system, the old ICSA system that's now gone today. And then we'll also look at the political structure of the tribe. So just when we go through it, you'll see there's differences between the responsibilities of men and women, but also you could say on the societal government level there's differences too. So that's where you see the ICSA is mostly run by your elite women, and then the political structure you see is run by your elite men. But you'll see that. So these are images of high status Choctaw people around this time period or earlier. On the left is a Choctaw woman. On the right is a Choctaw man. You can see the woman has a turkey feather cape. So that takes quite a bit of work to construct something like that. And then she has a lot of shell beads on her as well. Shell beads take a long, long time to make. Later on, when I was in school, I'd always hear about how, Europeans come in, trade beads to the Indians, and they just thought it was the craziest thing in the world, and they just give all their stuff away. It's very one-sided. But if you understand how much work it takes to get one of these beads made, it could take a maker several days just to make one bead, because they're using tools that are in this case, what they're using is sand and a drill. So none of it's metal implements. So it either wears out or it just takes a long time to create these things. So on the right, you see a Choctaw man covered in tattoos. The tattoos show that he's been around the block a few times. If you saw him in the woods, go way off that way. So it just shows that he's been very victorious in battle. He's killed a lot of people, protecting his community. So, if you know who these two people are, the artist that did these does it off real people. So, any of you guys know Jared Tom? Yeah, that's him. As you can tell, he's shorter. So Choctaw women's responsibilities. In Choctaw society, women were called the givers of life. They were the ones that bore the children. They were the ones that also did all the agricultural stuff. So they're the ones that would give life to the food that the whole community would be sustaining themselves on for the year and the next year and the next year. So they're about bringing life to Choctaw society. They're the foundation of the community. Choctaw society is a matriarchal society. That means the women are more important in the society. They hold equal status to men, but they're just viewed as more important. So for some of you that grew up, I grew up in a patriarchal family. So if my mom's mad, that's one thing. If dad's mad, I know better. But my wife's family, if grandma's mad, you best leave. Choctaw women were the only ones that could own property in Choctaw society. The men owned the things they could carry, their weapons, maybe their tools, but the women are the ones that own the house. They're the ones that owned the property and all the things that are in the house. And I don't mean like ownership like we know it today. Everything's still very communal. It's shared, it's reciprocated, but it's just that it belongs to the woman, not the man. The woman's in charge of all the trading. The man is not. And that changes through time, and we'll go over that in the next presentation. I talked about agriculture. Women are the ones that are going out and planting the seeds. They're growing the crops. And then the community will all come together later and harvest these crops, and then they share them equally with everyone. Very communal-based, very community-based. And then they did a lot of domestic activities, which you'll see here. So Choctaw women did pottery. Pottery is a really cool art form. So some pottery was done just as functional pieces of work, just something to use to eat with, something to use to cook with, something to use to store. But also Choctaw pottery was very well known for its art and its beauty. And you can see some of these pieces here are just beautiful pieces of art. Choctaw potters, we don't need to use glaze. We can shine our pots so well that they get almost as shiny as glaze just by smashing the clay molecules together. A lot of it's chemistry. I mean, Choctaw people knew chemistry not in the ways we know it now, but these women, they did it every day. The bottom right's a big cooking pot. You could see one of those as, basically the same size as those cast iron cauldrons that some of your families may have, or you see on the side of the road in people's yards. But these are huge cooking pots that are meant to feed a whole family or to help feed the community. Choctaw women also did real intricate baskets. So river cane is a plant that grows all in the southeastern and eastern United States. It's a native type of bamboo. And Choctaw people would harvest this and use it for different things. Men would make arrows out of it, but women stripped it into baskets. The one on the top right is your big pack basket. That's the type of basket they would use to carry your children in, or to, let's say, carry trade goods in. Of course, you don't use the same basket for both. Kids are dirty. Okay, got it. Okay. Over on the left is a fanner basket. It's used with the corn. So as you throw the corn up in the air, the wind will take some of the debris out of it. God, my terms are all off today. Probably because I slept until 9. The one on the bottom left is a real interesting basket. It's it's kind of like, well, I'll put it this way. As Choctaw people started trading with American and Europeans, they started to see that they liked to have trunks in the front of their bed. And Choctaws thought that was just the weirdest thing ever. But Europeans wanted trunks. So Choctaws started weaving these huge trunk baskets. And American and Europeans started trading for these and using them. So, Choctaw culture isn't static. It changes through time, just as our art forms do. The basketry that we do today is different than the basketry we've done in the past. The clothing that we wear today is different than our traditional clothing that we wear when we have activities. But that traditional clothing is even more different than the clothing that was worn back then. So things change through time. Choctaw women also did a lot of cooking. So these are examples of Choctaw pottery. Up on the top middle is banaha being cooked. On the bottom center is walukchi, grape dumplings. Over on the bottom right looks like tonche labona. And there's other dishes in there too. But Choctaw pottery works just like cast iron does. It holds heat real well. And it kind of works the same way. So if you're cooking a lot of meat in one of your pots, then you want to keep that grease ring around there because it's going to keep tasting better and better and better, just like cast iron. Actually, Europeans and Americans started trading for Choctaw pottery because it was lighter than cast iron and it worked the same way. So we'll get to the important people now. Choctaw men. So Choctaw men had a little bit different status in society. Like I said, their status is equal to women, but men are viewed as a little bit more expendable. And that's just because we dumb and do stupid things? No. Proof through YouTube. But Choctaw men were the takers of life. Their job was to kill things. As well as doing heavy work too. But, their job was to protect the community. And to protect the community, they had to be great warriors. So, Choctaw men did hunting. They played stickball. And you wouldn't think stickball necessarily to be, they're going to go play a game. But stickball back then was used to settle disputes. It was used to keep the men in shape and in prime physical fitness. peak fitness for when they went to war. The men interacted with other groups. The men usually handled the politics. So if you looked at a lot of what the women did, the women are handling a lot of the things, day-to-day life, society life. The men handle the politics. They're the ones that are going between villages and talking with other groups. The men do the heaviest work. So, like I said, the woman usually owns the house. Well, the woman also builds the house herself. Her family, when she gets married, her family all come together and they will help build her house. The men will do the heavy work and lay up the huge foundation poles, and then the women build the house after that. The men would also go out and help plow the field. And once the field was plowed, then the men would leave and the women would come and plant the crops. So, I talk about them being, the takers of life and the givers of life. Back then, in this traditional mindset, it was that people had different medicine on them. So the women's medicine and the men's medicine would fight each other. So if you had women which were good at, bringing life, planting crops, etc., you don't want the men's opposite medicine to be out there, killing the crops while she's trying to plant them, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. And then they served as orators and historians, kind of as I'm doing now. Because you know what happens when a man gets old? All he can do is talk. Got it. So I was talking about values earlier, and this is a good classic example of values. So as Choctaw men are, taught to be warriors, we're not individualistic. Choctaw community or Choctaw society is based on community values. It's based on what's best for the community. It's based on working together. And hunting's the same way. War tactics are the same way. When men would go out and they would hunt deer, in this center picture, you could go out and you could stalk a deer, and it might take you a few hours. Or all the guys can go out, they make a big ring, and then throughout the morning they move themselves in, and all the deer get trapped. And as the men move in closer, then they just shoot them all down. It makes hunting a lot easier. On the left, you can see that this is a man dressed up as a deer, walking up and shooting a deer. So, who here's ever snuck up on a deer? It's pretty hard. You ever snuck up on one going 70? A little bit easier. But the point being is that, Choctaw men were so skilled, and they knew what they were doing. I mean, they were doing this since they were young boys, starting around 6, 7, 8 years old. They start learning from their uncles how to be good warriors, how to be good hunters, but also to be good fathers. On the right is a group of men. These are actually Choctaw freedmen in this picture, but it's the same technique where they'd go out to an area during the summer where the water's been cut off, and they'll throw black walnut holes in the water. The tannic acid in the black walnut holes takes all the oxygen out, so the fish all have to come up to the surface. And then they can just shoot them with their bows or use nets or really just grab them out of the water. Might be illegal nowadays, but good technique. As I talked about before too, Choctaw men played stickball. These 3 images were done by Catlin, and they all represent what Choctaw stickball players looked like, actually in Indian Territory. So this is, again, these are much later than the time period I'm talking about, but they're really, really close. So Choctaw men would play stickball. And as I said before, stickball was used to settle disputes. So if there was an issue between 2 communities, or an issue within the community, or an issue between tribes, Choctaws were known to play against the Creeks almost on a annual basis for close hunting lands. Whoever won the stickball game won that dispute. So if the Choctaws won, they got to hunt in those lands that year. If the Muskogees had won, then they got to hunt in those lands that year. So it was, while stickball is a very brutal sport, people were crippled, if not killed. it was a much more humane way than going to war and having a lot of people dying. Because what happens when you have a lot of men die? Women got to retrain new ones, and that's just a lot of work. My poor wife. And as I said before, Choctaw men also served as orators, historians. They went out and they interacted with other groups. This here is a picture of Peter Pitchlynn. So this again is later. This is in the 1830s after removal. But Peter Pitchlynn was one of those. He was schooled, and I'll get into the schooling in the next presentation. But later in his life, he and his kids, they became great servant leaders for Choctaw people. And that's one of the things about our people is, as I said, it's all about community. So I'll go into it a little bit more, but servant leadership and rotational leadership are two things that you see very much in Choctaw society. But I'll touch on that a little bit later. So, Choctaws did different things depending on the season. So, in today, the only thing we worry about with the season is, is it going to rain today or am I going to get blown away? Unless you're outside a lot, unless you're involved with agriculture, a lot of people today don't really deal a lot with our seasons. But in the past, knowing what season it was life. So, for instance, during the warm season months, the whole Choctaw community would come together. And when the community came together, they would help. They would, where am I? Yeah, I'm on warm season. Sorry. So this is where the women would go out and start planting the fields. But the fields, you have a communal field, but you also have your individual fields next to your house. So yeah, your family is going to go out and plant a few things, but you have these really big communal fields, and that's where the whole community will come together and help plant all the crops. They'll help get the field ready. So, what I keep hammering on is it's all about community. It's not about an individual like we're taught today in American society. It's taught as a community. The men and boys at this time period, they would do small game hunting, fishing, they'd play stickball. This was really the time period for that. There's not a lot going on for them. And the women and the girls would start working on the fields, making sure the fields are ready for the crops, all that. During the cold season, the community would come together and they would work together to harvest the field. So the women and the men would come together, all the boys, the girls, everyone, and they would help harvest these huge communal fields. If it was a good harvest, they'd come back and they'd have big feasts. If it was a bad harvest, then maybe they took what they had and they tried to preserve some of it for the winter. Or they used their stores from last year to help get them through. This is the time period where the men would go off and hunt large game. So it's best to hunt deer during the winter because they've already mated, but also they don't have worms like a lot of small game and stuff does and large game. So this is where Choctaw men would either go on these long winter hunts. They maybe go off for a few weeks, or they may go off for a few days, and they would have these, they build these shelters just for the night in the area that they were hunting in. So some of these hunts, and I'll talk about it later, but they would go as far off as Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma later on. During this time period, it was really, there was plenty of game in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee. So they really stayed in these areas. Looking at social class. So in Choctaw society, you did have a hierarchy. And the way it worked for the men is you had your Choctaw Hamita. These were your young men. These were the ones that had not proven themselves in battle yet, or that had gone through any sort of rite of passage. So these would be a lot of your young teens that really just haven't made it to adulthood yet. But these could also be men that decided not to be warriors. These could be men that decided that they wanted to do a particular craft. So maybe that they were expert potters. Maybe they were expert basket makers. Maybe they were experts at doing really high-end flint knapping, or all these other different traditional arts and trades. So you didn't have to be a warrior. Everyone had the choice to do what they wanted. And we don't talk about it a lot in today's society. It's getting more and more popular, and it's getting more and more, I guess, okay to talk about. But this is where maybe some of your people that were maybe mentally challenged, maybe had handicaps, they are also in this category. If they could prove themselves in battle, then they could be warriors. But sometimes they didn't have to. There was always a place for people in Choctaw society. It didn't matter who you were. Today we label people that aren't normal as outcasts. I mean, everyone here seems pretty normal, but then you point at everyone and ask, are you normal? Everyone's going to say no. But, you know, the point being is that you didn't shun anybody just because they were different. It's very different than kind of Western cultures today. Your Tushka or your warriors, these are your young men and young adults that have proved themselves in battle. They are able to take a wife, and they are able to tattoo. Your Hatak Holatopa, or your beloved men, these are your elders and your leading warriors. So these are men that have gained a high rank status in society. These are the men that when they speak, you listen. And above them are the Miko, or the chiefs. And we'll get into the different types of chiefs a little bit later. Now for the women, we only know about the Ahoyo Holatopa, the beloved women. And that's because Europeans and Americans didn't really write about the women because they were centered on the men. The men are more important in Western society. So they didn't write about the women. So we don't have a lot of information, and this is where maybe if something's been passed down through your family, you may know more about it. But for the best of our knowledge that we have, we just know about the Ahoyo Holatopa. So these would have been your high-status clan women. They would have been the women basically running the town. These are the ones that are running things. So Choctaw society, a lot of people today talk about clans. And while Choctaws did have clans in the past, they're not really what's important. Instead, as Choctaw people, we had moieties, or as we call them, Iksa. So we had the Okla in Halata and the Kashapa Okla. These were the two Iksa that Choctaws had. The beloved people and the divided people. And I can go into more detail about how those terms came up. But just understand that these were the main divisions in each town. Underneath these divisions is where you had clans. So you may have had anywhere between 4 to 8 clans under the beloved people and 4 to 8 in the divided people. But overall, what's important is that we're a society based on moieties, not clans. And that's a common misconception today. And that's just because lack of education, lack of understanding. I mean, 5 years ago, I didn't know this, but this is something that I want to try to start teaching. Is something, you know, that's the goal we're doing here, is to try to, I don't expect you guys to know, you know, to remember everything in this presentation, but I want to just show it to you. And if you have questions about it, we can go through it. So each village would have 2 separate fires. So if there was a marriage, let's say that there's a wedding that's going to be going on, each of the Iksa would come and set up their own medicine fires. And then those people would be set around those fires. So the people in the village that were part of the beloved people would sit around one fire, and those that were part of the divided people would sit around the other fire. So anytime it was something that involved the whole village, there would be 2 fires. If it was just the men, we're lazy, we only build 1 fire. So And then each Iksa had their own Alikshi too. And just to clarify, in the past there were more than one Alikshi. You had many different types of Alikshi for different things. So you had doctors for, herbs and plants. You had doctors for what we'd call the supernatural. We'd have rainmakers. We'd have different doctors for different things. Through time, that's changed a lot, and our doctors are really kind of a catch-all today, but that's not always the case. It just depends where you go. So the way that marriage worked is to keep the society in a balance. The way that the laws were written is you had to marry someone from the opposite Iksa. If you married someone that was from the same Iksa as you, you'd be separated by the community and your children would be taken away from you, because that was considered intermarriage, inbreeding, incest. And that's bad. I grew up in Arkansas. I know this. Bad. So, seen some scary things. No, I pick on Arkansas. They're all right. They're just as bad as Oklahoma. Don't worry. And then when a man would marry his wife, he would move in with the wife and her family because it's a matriarchal society. It's based around the women. Now, if a man were to get divorced, the way it would work is he'd probably come home. All his stuff would be on the porch. The door's locked. He just grabs his stuff, cries all the way home to his mom. Really not much different than today. So children, okay, so I know what I'm trying to say, but I was trying to write it out and I couldn't make any sense of it. So don't pay attention to the wall of text here. Just understand that, you have these differences between the two different Iksa. So let's say that a man and a woman got married. The man would be, from the opposite Iksa. So let's say that she's part of the beloved people and he's part of the divided people. Well, if they have a son, it's a matriarchal society. It's based on the mother's Iksa. So you want the son to learn the mother's side. So what would happen is, while the father would take care of affairs in the house, just as we do today, it would be up to the maternal uncle to teach the child, to teach his nephew different things about maybe hunting techniques, about maybe certain ways of flint knapping. It seems kind of absurd. I know a lot of y'all are like, "Oh, I don't know about my brother." I'd say the same thing. My wife's brother. No, kidding. But the point being is, it sounds really weird, but we send our kids off to school to complete strangers today, and that's how they learn everything. So it's really not that odd. The girls would be raised either by their mother or most likely their aunt. Oh, there's the divorce. Yeah, so if there was a divorce, the children always stay with the mother or the mother's family. If there's a death, what would happen if the mother were to die? Usually the kids would go back to the mother's family. So it was very common that you would see the husband, if his wife were to die, he would marry one of his wife's sisters. And that way he'd stay around his kids and he would stay around the family that he's comfortable with, which is real common. And during this time, too, men could have multiple wives. And that's just because if you wanted a man that could provide for you, if he could provide, then you didn't care how many wives he had as long as he provided for you. But just because, let's say that this particular man was a chief and he had multiple wives. But if he's not providing for you, you throw his stuff on the porch and get you one that can. So, I don't know, it's really abstract, but that's how the mindset for Choctaw society was much different than today. I'm confident to say that we've lost the mindset that Choctaw people had in the past. But that's okay, because the mindset and the culture and everything changed through time. So it's okay that we've progressed. It's okay that we've done this. This is part of the normal cycle of things. Nick, I've been pointing at you the whole time to make a change, and now I get nothing. So the laws in Choctaw society. In the past, the law was all decided by the Iksa. So let's say that there was a man, and he came stumbling into camp, and he may tripped over a fire or something, and the ember went off and caught someone's house on fire. If no one had died, then what would happen is him and his family would be liable to offer goods in exchange for what they've destroyed. So, for instance, they may have to go and give them materials so they can build a new house, or maybe a gift of some goods, hunting equipment, something to compensate the other family and the other Iksa for the damages. But if it's a murder or an accidental death, they were to be executed. No questions asked. If they were found to be at fault, then they were executed. And that's just how you kept balance. It's extremely hard to keep balance. You can see our criminal justice laws today. I mean, we have a lot more room, but it's not a perfect system. This isn't a perfect system either. It's just, it worked, and it worked for thousands of years. So when a man or a woman or whoever would be executed, he'd be given a year to get his family affairs in order, maybe help get the crops, maybe get everything done, and then probably after the harvest during the winter, he would go to his own execution. And this was an honor system, and it was never broken, because if you broke it, then someone else in your family would be executed in your stead, and then you'd be banned from the society. I'll talk about it in the next presentation, but Choctaws didn't have jails until the 1880s because this system was honored all the way up till then. So moving over to more of the political side and the men, you have the government. In Choctaw society, early on, it was more like a collection of villages that were all kind of banded together, kind of like what you see with the Muskogee people. But we took it a step to the left, and instead we created districts. So you'd have many different villages within one district, and you had 3 different districts. The districts, we call them Othdi. It's kind of a loose term for a council fire. So you had the Okla Falaya, the Ahipat Okla, and the Okla Hanali. These were the 3 Choctaw districts. You'll see. So these are Choctaw lands around 1750. Parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and by the 1730s, Choctaw started spreading into Louisiana with the defeat of the Natchez. And that red dot's Naniwaya. But as you zoom in, these are the 3 districts. Up to the top right is the Ahipat Okla. To the left is the Okla Falaya, the long people. And that's because their district was real long. It went north-south. And the Okla Hanali, the 6 towns. Now, a lot of people, they have family stories that say that they're from the 6 towns. And it depends what you mean. If you're talking about the district, that's this area as a whole. But if you're talking about the 6 towns villages, those are them right here. They're by Newton, Mississippi, just south of Newton, in Jasper County and Newton County. And these were the core of the 6 town villages. You also had the Chickasaw and the Yowani. So to keep it real simple, or to actually overcomplicate things, basically what you have is through time, Choctaw people started around where Naniwaya is, and they moved south a little bit. But through time, because of warfare, disease, the push of Europeans, you have tribes that were broken that were trying to find a new home. And a lot of these tribes, when they got to the Choctaw accepted them. and the Choctaw people made them part of their family. This is where you see that maybe the Ohlone, maybe the Chickasaw, maybe the Six Towns, these were all different people from different areas, and they came in and amalgamated with the Choctaw. That's why the Six Towns district, everything I read, they don't differentiate between the other two, but the Six Towns district were different people. And you have a lot of people moving in from the Mobile area and coming in. So I way overcomplicated that. Don't worry about it. I can go into it in more detail. This actually is how this explanation also explains how the clans work between the beloved people and the divided people, but we'll go there. So the political structure. So you have your villages. And if each of your villages would have, early 1700s, you had basically four chiefs. By the end of the 1700s, you basically had three. So you had your Minko, which was your village chief. He's the one that presided over the village. He was the one that greeted visitors. He's kind of the man in charge. Now, the thing is, in Choctaw society, is you could never tell anyone what to do. Everyone has their own freedom to do what they want as long as they don't break a law. So that means that your village chief usually had to be a good orator. He had to be a good servant leader. So in Choctaw society, the chiefs didn't get their power because they're title. They got their power because they're servant leaders. They got their power, and I shouldn't say power, they got respect because of who they are as a person. And that's something that we all, I think, need to strive for. This is something that's very traditional in our culture, and it's something that I argue we need to continue doing. And I think for the most part we do, but a lot of people don't know this. They think just because I'm a director doesn't mean that I have any status over anyone else in here. My status as an individual is by my actions and then by my involvement in the community. To me, that's how I gain my respect as an individual, and that's how I sleep at night. And I really strive people that are in positions, leadership positions in the tribe, that outlook is what you need to take home with you and you need to explore. And it's rotational leadership. So in my department, I may be the director, but the way that I do things is just because I know a lot about the history and I get a phone call from someone and say, hey, I want to learn more about this subject. Just because I have a lot of that knowledge doesn't mean I'm going to do it just because it's easier. I may pass it on to someone else in my department to do because I want them to learn as well. But also, with rotational leadership, you share the burden of leaders. In Western society, leadership is very stressful. Stress has a lot of negative impacts on people. They get fat. But in Choctaw society, you had your Minko, you had your Tishominko, your Tushkaminko, your Faniminko. All these chiefs shared responsibilities in the village. They did different things. So let's say that you wanted to send someone off to make peace negotiations. If it was the chief all the time, that would get, okay, yeah, the chief could do that. But what if the chief also had to make military alliances? What if he had to prepare everything? He'd be running around like crazy. And that's why we share leadership. None of these chiefs were any stronger than the one before them, or the ones equal to them. The Minko has no more power than the Tishominko, the Tushkaminko, or the Faniminko. It just depends, what task is needed by the community. The community goes to that individual that can help them with that task. Now, like I said before, you couldn't really tell anyone what to do. Let's say the Tushkaminko wanted to go off and he wanted to go to war with another village or maybe with another tribe. He would go to all the warriors. He would seek the counsel of all the elders. They would tell him their thoughts. Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? And then he would go to all the warriors and he would say, after he was done talking with them, working with them, after he presents his case and shows his actions as an individual, if he's a good leader, people will follow him. If he's not a good leader, then the warriors may not follow him. He can't tell them to follow him. He has to convince them. And it's not a convincing, it's not like like we do in business today. There's no coercion. I don't know how to say that word. How do you say that word? Anyone know? Coercion? Yeah, can't speak. I'm from Arkansas. So, University of Arkansas. About to get my master's here. Yeah. So, anyway, the point being, I hope you guys can kind of understand that. I've been kind of hammering on it, but this slide really talks about how the values of Choctaw people, the values of our leadership in the past. And I argue some of the values that you see with our leadership in the past, you can still see today. Not just in the government side, but in your community side. How many community leaders do you see that, they just give and give and give? I've seen a lot of pastors that do a lot of good in their community. They're leaders. Your stickball coaches for your youth, they're leaders. So there's not always just one leader. It's shared. And it just depends on what role, what issue needs to be fixed. Probably a bad way of saying it, but I think you get it. Come on, Nick. Okay. So, that's it for this one.